Many of you will remember, I'm sure, some with a degree of nostalgia, what Sundays used to be like. They're very different to what they are now. They were quiet, reverential. Shops were closed. Television and radio were circumspect in what they broadcast. I remember as a young boy, one Sunday morning, going out with my mates to kick a ball around on a local soccer pitch. And my dad, who wasn't religious at all, neither of my parents went to church, came searching for me, grabbed hold of my collar and dragged me back to the house. "You don't play soccer on a Sunday." Interesting, isn't it? I remember when I first came to Melbourne with my family in 1988, and you will recall this, a number of you. The city was like a ghost town on a Sunday. It was deserted and lifeless. Now, take a look at this terrific city here on Sunday afternoons. It's buzzing, it's exciting, it's electric. Huge numbers of people, mostly young, enjoying their free time in the city. There's fun, there's laughter, there's music, there are buskers, there's entertainment, there are shops. Sometimes there are sports crowds intermingling with people drinking coffee or packing into the fast food outlets. There is vitality. It is the most joyful part of the city's week. Even in the weekday, yeah, it's busy, but it's people in suits and ties going off and doing business and having conversations about work. Sunday is different. Now, into this wonderful plethora of life and vitality, one of our church members said to me this week, she'd gone out for lunch somewhere and she came back after lunch, and through all these people and all this energy, she saw the big wooden doors of our church closed. This is our church, along with the others, we're not alone, shutting ourselves out of the most active and vibrant time in the life of the city. Our stained glass windows, our walls, and our big doors exemplify that. No one home. We're closed. The short passage that we read from 1 Corinthians, moving on from his boring theology, Paul just moves to talk about ordinary things, about his travel and his friends. And he talks about being in Ephesus, a coastal town of what is now on the Turkish coast. And this was a town, way back then, this was a town buzzing with life, buzzing with energy. It had wonderful architecture. The famous Temple of Artemis, built in 550 BC, was recognized as one of the 7 wonders of the world. The great theater of Celsus was a beautiful theater holding 25,000 people, and it was central in the heart of that harbor city, teeming with life and multiculturalism, because it was a harbor. People came from all over the world. This was Ephesus. And at first, Paul thought it was just too hard. It was just too difficult to try and establish a church here. But despite his original misgivings, he saw this life, this vitality, as a great opportunity. And here he says it in chapter 16, verse 9, a huge door of opportunity for good work has opened up here. For once, what was considered closed is now open. In the New Testament, there are three meanings for the Greek word for door. The Greek word is thura. It can simply mean any old door. That's one meaning. Or the opening of a cave. But most likely, when you put it in the context of this particular letter, it is the third meaning that's much more appropriate. An opportunity. And many of the different translations of the Bible say that. They don't actually say a door, they say an opportunity is opened. A favorable time for accessing a possibility. It's a bit like the French word entrée. And it is this third sense of this word, I believe, that is used here. Megale, meaning a great, big, large door. Thura, Megale, Thora, has opened up for Paul, where up to this point, all he could see in Ephesus were metaphorical walls. Imagine the synagogues in Ephesus. It was a multicultural community with a big Roman and Greek population, but the Jewish community had started moving there about 100 years before Christ, and they'd started to establish their own little places of worship, the synagogues. Think of the synagogues for a moment. They were closed buildings. Nobody, unless you were a bona fide Jew, could go in there. There were no windows. There was just a big wooden door. And in this city, the Jewish community had survived by hiding behind that door, behind those walls. And into this fortress mentality comes Paul. He sees it not as a problem, but as an opportunity to open up this world to the dynamic message of Christianity. Not to retreat to a more safe haven like Corinth, where it was pretty safe and cared for and had a good community there, no. But to blow that door off its hinges and kick the walls down. And when those walls are kicked down, not only can people see in, but people can see out. A short while ago, a homeless man died whilst he was trying to catch a few moments of disturbed sleep in one of our laneways. He was only 53. He was not 100 yards from a church door. His possessions consisted of a plastic bag of worn-out old clothes, a used plastic coffee cup, and a frayed old photograph, presumably of a family member. I know that church will open its big wooden doors on Sunday and with a warm smile welcome well-dressed people into its comfortable pews. They'll sing hymns and they'll say prayers. And they'll go home satisfied that somehow they've done their religion for the week. The minister will have worked hard on his sermon. The church office will have filled in all the forms and ticked all the administrative boxes. But there will be a massive disconnect between the conformity of that church and the actions and words of Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus of Nazareth worked outside the religion of his day. Indeed, he challenged the religion which had built huge walls around itself and was content to spend its time thinking about church minutiae, ensuring that the rules and the regulations were fulfilled, but ignoring and even condemning those who didn't comply with them. Many of you will know that I grew up in a seaside town in the north of England, Blackpool, a holiday town. It's famous for its rather tacky entertainment, a very large fun fair called the Pleasure Beach, the Golden Mile, consisting of dishonest-looking spruikers, but most of all, it's famous for its not very good copy of the Eiffel Tower. Blackpool Tower is 518 feet tall. It was built in 1894. And you see, I learned all this at school. We all had to learn this because that was like the most important thing in our town. And we were told, most importantly, it was the 120th tallest freestanding tower in the world. I remember as a young kid being incredibly impressed, going somewhere and seeing a giant-size model of this tower. Made, pretty big. It was like from here, probably just to the top of where those organ pipes are. And this giant-size model of Blackpool Tower was made out of millions and millions of matchsticks. It was made by a man who had spent 27 years of his life making it. Now, any sane person's reaction to such a feat is made up of equal parts of admiration for its dogged tenacity and amazement at the total and utter uselessness of the project. But tell that man that what he's been doing was a total waste of time and energy, and you'd be asking for trouble. The magnificent structure, his creation, has value for him. He spent 27 years sticking these little matchsticks together. It's both a genuine labor of love and a classic example of Marxist economics. Its sole value rests in the labor that has been invested in it. But despite all that, it's not worth $5 at the local op shop. Because you see, the world doesn't happen to be perishing for lack of matchstick models of Blackpool Tower. And nor is the world perishing for lack of knowledge of the constitution and discipline of the church. nor is it perishing because the minutes of the church committees need to be designed in a more formal way, nor is it perishing because somebody doesn't like a particular hymn or even last week's sermon. Tell that poor man, God bless him, in the last few moments of his life, as he gasps breath on the cold stone floor of that laneway, that we filled in all the right forms and we fulfilled all the obligations of the church hierarchy. And know that he will then die happy. It's so easy, isn't it, to build our own matchstick towers and think that the energy we put into that stuff complies with the demands of the kingdom of God. It's so easy to do this within the cocoon of our churches. It's so easy to convince ourselves that this is what our faith is about. But that's not what our faith is about. Our faith is about blasting down the walls and exposing ourselves often to the unpleasant truth that's outside. Jesus' whole ministry was outside, not inside. He challenged the rules of the Pharisees and the doctrines of the scribes. In the 18th and 19th centuries, when the missionaries poured out of the UK to every part of what was then known as the British Empire, they landed in the great continents all over the world. And when they went to Africa, they would spread across and through all the different villages of that vast continent. And when they started to preach and to encourage people to think about the Christian faith, they would meet in small groups in the middle of the village square. And maybe the pastor or the missionary would read from the Bible, they maybe sing a hymn or two, and the whole of the life of the village would be going on around them. They would be integrated into the life of the village. So people would be carrying water, and dogs would be running around, and little kids would be crawling about on the dust floor. But they were all one. And then after a while, it was suggested that perhaps maybe just to get out of the sun for a bit in the middle of the day, they would perhaps build a bit of a building just on tree poles with a straw roof. That was okay. Worship went on, a bit like what's on the front page of the order of service today, went on with the village being able to see within the worshiping community, and those of the worshiping community being able to see out. And then, of course, as the local village Christian community began to develop into an institution with rules and regulations, this coincided with walls being built, at which point the church became totally separated from its own community. And there is a parable here for us today. We can carry on building our edifices of matchsticks. We can strengthen our walls and bolt our doors. We can continue to do religion, balance the books and fill the forms. But the people outside our walls don't give a stuff about what we do inside them. And whenever the church is shaken by indifference or even hostility, just as the church did in Ephesus, it hides behind its walls. Remember, they banned John Wesley from preaching within the church that he had been ordained to serve the Anglican Church. and he had to go outside and to preach in the open air. They excommunicated Martin Luther for challenging the church of his day to the extent that he had to hammer his declaration of belief on the outside of the big wooden church door in Wittenberg. They threw out Father Trevor Huddleston, who was an Anglican priest in South Africa, for daring to preach to multicolored congregations, to the extent that he had to preach in the open air where there were no church walls. And what we must do, following in the footsteps of many, many people like that, we must break down the walls and be open to what is beyond our church. We must break down the walls that separate us from humanity and open our doors to the world. We must break down the walls of regarding the Bible as some God-given text dropped from heaven. We must break down the walls of the creeds written hundreds of years ago to control the lay people and place power in the hands of the clergy. We must break down the walls of tradition which still accepts the concept of heaven up there where God is, and somehow down there's a bad place called hell with the demons. We must break down the walls of theology, which insists that we are all sinners and must be saved by some archaic notion of salvation through the suffering and death of a man from Nazareth. And that God somehow is a distant theistic God controlling the world and desiring us to comply with his demands or else. We must remove all these walls. And the more access points, this is the key, the more access points a church has to the outside community through all its programs, the higher the odds that its ministry is vibrant and its congregation will grow. And I don't just mean physical doors of wood and metal and glass. I mean multiple access points by which people enter the life of the church in varied and meaningful ways. I had hoped to be able to do this here in St. Michael's. Here is a perfect opportunity for a unique sort of church, accepting all, irrespective of faith or none, irrespective of social or financial status, irrespective of sexuality, skin color, irrespective of whether a person is homeless or who lives in Turak, irrespective of whether a person is highly respected or is in or out of jail. We should make our church available in many different ways to many different people. And we have to start to do that now. In Greek mythology, there was a god called Kairos, the god of opportunity. He is depicted in that mythology as a youth with a single lock of hair dangling from his forehead. Now, Kairos could only be grasped as he approached, for once he passed by, no one chasing after him could grasp him, for the back of his head was bald. Inaction or neglect meant an opportunity missed. So here's the call to St. Michael's, to open its doors in as many ways as possible to as many people as possible. What I called earlier access points. And when there are no walls, this two-way process of understanding can begin. So too, in individuals' lives, Break down those walls of prejudice. Be open to the world around you. And when there are no walls within and around you, you can see a new and exciting world, a challenging world, which will bring new light and a new life into your church and your life. And so each of you go as free spirits, alive to the world around you, open to the lives of others, sharing the spirit of release, not imprisonment, believing in love, joy, and peace. Love, joy, and peace that can change the world and even our church.